to Chris Sweeney Talks 2. I'm joined this week by Donnachadh McCarthy. Now, he is the director of the Climate Media Coalition. First of all, Donnachadh, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate I have butchered your name there, so I'll probably have a lot of Irish people. I'll be butchering your name, but I apologise. That's perfect. I wanted to talk today about ULEZ. I think it's been in the news a lot. For anyone that's not aware, a few weeks ago there was a by-election for Boris Johnson's old seat in Uxbridge, in just on the outskirts of London, and it seems to be that ULEZ, because the Labour Party or Labour Mayor in London is trying to increase ULEZ. Well, not trying to, he is increasing the ULEZ area all over London. There was a backlash in that by-election, and the Conservative Party won the seat, or kept the seat, shall I say. And now we seem to be going on this thing where everyone's talking about ULEZ, and it seems to be a national debate, and it seems to be if Richie Sunak wants to stay in power as British Prime Minister, he should go against ULEZ and go down that path, and that seems to be it. So can I just maybe ask you, ULEZ, what is it in a nutshell? Because a lot of people maybe know the acronym, but they don't really understand what it is.
It stands for Ultra Low Emission Zone. It was initially introduced in London by the Tory Mayor, Boris Johnson, for central London, as a first step to cleaning up London's air. London's air regularly breaks international WHO safety levels. The Tory government has a requirement on local authorities to put action plans in place to clean up the air. And so one of the things the London did under Tory Boris was introduce ULEZ. It has been very successful. When it was introduced, something like half of commercial vehicles broke the clean air quality, didn't qualify for the ULEZ standards, and so they had to pay a £12.50 charge for operating in central London. Following the ULEZ introduction in central London, over 90% of commercial vehicles now pass clean air standards, so they don't have to pay the ULEZ charges. And the similar improvement has happened with cars that are entering the central London ULEZ zone. So what the mayor did, building on that on success, he decided to expand it so that the most polluted areas are outer London. Which seems ironic, normally it would be at the centre of capital cities or where the pollution congregates. But the mayor has done such a good job in cleaning up the central air with ULEZ and other projects he's done, such as electrifying the cab industry and the bus industry. He wants to bring clean air to the kids and people of outer London, 5 million people living in polluted air. And he's proposed that if you have a vehicle that's over a petrol vehicle that's more than 17 years old, or a diesel vehicle that's over 7 years old, you will need to pay a charge if you wish to use it within the ULEZ zone. But he has introduced, for poorer people, a £2,000 grant, or up to £5,000 if you're disabled and on benefits, to help you scrap the vehicle and change for a cleaner vehicle that qualifies. A 16-year-old petrol vehicle will qualify. And he's also introduced a £9,500 grant for commercial vehicles and for charity vans, etc., to enable any small business under 50 employees get a grant of £9,500 to help switch and get a cleaner vehicle.
I mean, that sounds astonishing. Thank you so much for your explanation. I didn't know all that. I do live in London myself, but I wasn't aware of all of that. Now, how many people are driving a 17-year-old car? It's not many, I would imagine. So why such a backlash? Because if you can have any car that is newer than 17 years old that's petrol, and I think you said 6 years for a diesel, 7 years, and you're also getting some money helping towards a replacement if you qualify. What's the problem? Well, why the backlash?
Politics. And the story goes back. There was no backlash from the right-wing media or campaigners from the ULEZ when the Tory mayor introduced it. There's a bit of a longer story behind it, really. There's a guy called Howard Cox who runs a campaign called Fair Fuel UK, who's one of the most powerful fossil fuel lobbyists in the United Kingdom that nobody has ever heard of. He has run a campaign every year for over 10 years to reduce fuel duty. What he does is that every year, to keep fuel duty the same, you have to have an inflationary increase, if that makes any sense. if you don't increase in line with inflation, you're cutting it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah, of course, yeah. Yes.
So what he does every year, 3 months before the budget, he has a campaign he runs in conjunction with the Mail and the Sun, and that's
the Daily Mail. That's the Daily Mail newspaper, Daily Mail, yeah.
And so basically, they run a campaign. 5 for the UK said the nasty government's going to raise taxes on fuel duty, and the government desperately says, we're not raising it, we're just raising in line with inflation, which keeps it the same. And they say we want to keep it the same. And every year they succeeded in actually forcing the government to freeze the fuel duty, which is a de facto cut. Now that may sound like a small impact. It's been devastating. What it has done over the last 10 to 12 years is that every year we've had a cut in fuel duty, which means we have lost collectively £125 billion in taxes, which would have been absolutely essential to funding the NHS properly to deal with the health issues that the country faces. We've lost 120 billion by this guy. So what happened 2 years ago was the government waved the white flag early. They said around 6 months before the anxious Jeremy Hunt said, we're not going to raise it in line with inflation, we're going to cut it this year. So Howard Cox was left without a campaign to run. So he looked around and says, well, what else can I campaign on? So he fixed on a number of things. He decided to target ULEZ. This guy is a fossil fuel lobbyist. He lives in Kent, in, what's the name of the place? Tunbridge Wells.
Very nice. Nice part of the world. I've been there, but nice part of the world.
He drives a nice 4x4 SUV. And he absolutely hates the Mayor of London and hates the idea that he's actually trying to clean up London's there, and hates the fact that he has brought in low traffic neighbourhoods to protect local kids, and he hates cycle lanes. So he had access to the Sun, the Mail and the Telegraph, and wrote articles attacking ULEZ, attacking cycle lanes, attacking protecting kids with low traffic neighbourhoods. And he has successfully got the right-wing media then to take up his issues and wage war on ULEZ in London. And they exaggerate and they confuse and they misinform. And it was got to such a stage in Uxbridge that people with electric vehicles thought they were going to have to pay a pollution charge. They implied everybody's going to pay it. And you're absolutely right. Only something like 8% of vehicles across London are not compliant. And a lot of those will be rich people or not necessarily poor people. And those who are poor, there's a £2,000 grant to change. And you can actually buy a new car, a new second-hand petrol vehicle for 2,000 quid.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I find odd about it is always that, I mean, my understanding of ULEZ, it's not to ban cars or attack motorists, it's to clean up the air so that everyone, older people, middle-aged people, young kids out in the street, people exercising, people walking, whatever it may be, we're all benefiting from cleaner air. And I would imagine that disproportionately attacks low-income people because you know they're probably in these polluted, sort of polluted and sort of very sort of compact areas with lots of people living or living near busy streets. Like you say, maybe richer people living out in leafy suburbs like Tunbridge Wells, where you don't have 8 buses going by your door every half an hour. Whereas so this is only helping people. Again, I'm staggered that more people haven't. Do you think people just have bought into the hype and just followed this kind of piper, shall we say, and just thought, right, ULEZ is a bad thing. It's the government trying to control us and ban cars.
Yeah. Well, on the health issue, there's 500,000 people in London suffer from asthma. 500,000. 12 kids die from acute asthma episodes in London every year. There's an estimate of 4,000 premature deaths from pollution in London every year, but the impacts are way beyond the deaths. It's a huge amount of poor people are 7 times more likely to have lung diseases in London than richer people. So yes, ULEZ is directed at poor people to protect them from the car driving classes who actually insist on driving in cities. There is a role for a car in society, but we have to accept 70% of trips in London are under 7 miles, 35% under 1 mile. And we have to try and, if we're going to have a city that's clean and safe for our kids to live and grow up in, and to my mind, it's a human right for a child to live go to school with clean air. It's a human right for a child to cycle to school without having to fear that he's going to be killed or crushed. It's a right for a child to be able to play in their family neighborhoods without fear of being crushed by HGV. It's this freedom for our kids that's being taken away by the current car culture. And in my view, the ULEZ is a step towards actually restoring that freedom for kids and the human right for kids to grow up. I mean, they've done studies and the kids' lungs are being stunted. And that's something that then remains with them for the rest of their lives. How dare we stunt kids? And this idea that's it's so basically what's happening here is actually writ large what's happened to Britain. The power of the 5 UKIP billionaire-owned media is staggering in our society. I've got a long history in activism and in politics. I was deputy chair of the Liberal Democrats. And I experienced there, when I was at the top of the party, the power of Murdoch and the Mail, Rothermere and Barclays was absolutely staggering. The parties are all frightened of them. There's a majority of Tory MPs support climate action, support action on environment, are pro protecting biodiversity. But the only Tory MPs who are given a platform in the media are nearly all from the extreme UKIP wing of the Tory party. The ones who oppose climate action, the ones who oppose ULEZ, the ones who oppose cyclanes, and the ones who oppose low traffic neighbourhoods protecting kids. And so the platform they're given in the Mail, the Sun, the Telegraph, GB News and TalkTV gives them the power. And what that means is that the Sunak as Prime Minister is implementing those policies. A disaster for Britain.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to the media in a second, but just something I wanted to touch on. You know, let's say we're talking about central London, and if anyone's not been to London or watching outside, obviously central London's a big area. I'm not just talking about, you know, I mean, London's a massive city, but I'm talking about the central area. You know, let's forget the outskirts for a second. Public transport to me is extremely good. I've never struggled to go anywhere not using public transport. I understand if you're disabled, maybe have a young child, okay, there's issues, but if you're a relatively able-bodied person and you know, I think getting around London is quite easy. You don't need a car, correct?
The 95% of people who commute to work in London, central London, do so without using a car. Only 5% of people who commute into London use a car, and so therefore, yes, you're absolutely right. It's not only that there's good public transport, but if one particular public transport isn't working, there's probably 3 or 4 other ways of how you can actually get to your destination. So if one line's down, you've got another 3 lines to choose, or bus routes or train routes. It's amazing. You've
even got the Uber boat now that goes down the Thames, which is essentially a water boat which stops places. I mean, so you can even go on the seas if you want, you know.
But people will always say, oh, you have to improve public transport before they'll get out of their car. Well, there will never be public transport. They will want a bus that takes them from their front door to the front door where they're going, no matter where they're going. And that's never going to happen. But, you know, in the real world, to make a city like London work with 8 million people, if all of us drive, you end up with Los Angeles. You'd have to demolish the city to build the motorways for us to just get through it. And of course, if you look at Los Angeles, that's not somewhere I would want to live.
Sure. So if we say central London's, you know, great public transport, and anyone, like you said, that anyone that's got a complaint about it, they have to get a reality check, because if you go to other cities in the world, London is a very, very good public transport system. I mean, I've been to several cities around the world, and, you know, London's definitely...
What I would say about London, that actually I think is really important to this debate, is the Tory press, I've called it UKIP press, billionaire press, and the Tories are making a huge song and dance about the impact of ULEZ supposedly on poorer drivers. So it's all about concern about poor drivers having to pay to pollute. And what's never mentioned is the Tories have cut free AM travel for pensioners across all of London. So all of the people who live in outer London who were old age pensioners who had free travel before 9 a.m. in the mornings had that taken away from them. No mention in the press about that. Secondly, the Tories, the mayor, London has the highest public transport fares in the world. Literally the highest in any capital city in the world, because the Tories cut all support of it prior to COVID, and they haven't restored a lot of that since COVID. And when the mayor got elected, the Labour mayor, he promised that he would do a fare freeze, and he introduced efficiencies, and he was able to fund a fare freeze, which is a real terms cut, to fares in London for the first 4 years of his mayorship. Then, of course, COVID hit and the revenues collapsed, so he had to fall back on the government for support. We were the only public transport capital city in the world that had no revenue funding from the government. And Sadiq Khan still managed to reduce fares for 4 years. But the Tories oppose that every year. And then finally, they have insisted that the TfL raise their fares as part of the deal over COVID. And for 10 years, all commuter trains from outer London and outside London into central London, for the hundreds of thousands of people who commute to work by train, including many thousands of poor people, they insisted that fares should be above inflation for over a decade. And a parallel to that, they cut fuel duty every year. And yet the Tories are saying there's a war on motorists, and they never talk about the war on kids, lives and lungs. They never talk about the war on public transport users, which are the poorest in our society, that they've been waging war on for over a decade. But the billionaire media never, ever talks about that. That should have been the issue in Uxbridge. Are the Tories going to reduce the costs for poor people who have to use public transport into central London? And that wasn't mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was saying the public transport system was so great. I was maybe looking more at the convenience, the timetable. I take your point on the cost. I mean, that's obviously an issue. But one thing I want to say, so with central London now, if we look at the outskirts of London, and again, we're not talking about countryside here. We're talking about the outskirts of London. It's still fairly built up, but it's maybe not central London. Those people say, right, I need my car to get from here to there, and the public transport is not as good out there. What do you say there?
Well, it's again, if you expect the same level of infrastructure in the suburbs as you've got in the central city, you're not going to get it, because it's more diffuse. However, if you look at the coverage of underground stations, Elizabeth line stations, bus routes, what else is there? There's an extraordinary array of infrastructure, even in outer London, that's available to people. But there is a culture of people that they're entitled to their car, and it's more prevalent in the outer suburbs, where a lot of older people live, where they have grown up where the car is king. But still, most journeys in London are under 5 miles. A lot of them do oppose cycle lanes. They're screaming about cycling. They're screaming about low traffic neighbourhoods. But there is a couple of boroughs, such as Waltham Forest, which is in outer London, which has actually pioneered low traffic neighbourhoods and cycle lanes, and they have seen a reduction in car ownership, a reduction in traffic, increase in cycling, and of course that means a healthier society. The health impacts of active travel as opposed to using cars is extraordinary. I mean, one professor said this is the magic pill, because the study done at the University of Glasgow found that people who regularly cycle to work had a 40% reduction in a huge range of serious life-threatening illnesses, everything from lung diseases to cancers to dementia to heart disease, were radically reduced if you could encourage people out of their car to walk or cycle to work. And so therefore it's a huge health issue from one of the invisible impacts of our car culture is the devastating impacts of inactivity diseases. That's invisible. And we're talking about millions of people suffering inactivities in the United Kingdom. And we're talking about an obesity crisis for our kids. In Holland, in the 1970s, they had the same car culture as we have in Britain. Car was king. And during a number of years, a number of kids were being killed going to school. And so the public parents set up a group called Stop Murdering Our Child. Close the door. They were somebody passing with music on. The parents set up a campaign called Stop Murdering Our Kids. Very, very graphic name. And what they did is they went outside the town halls, they lay down, and they started what is now called die-ins, where the bodies outside the town halls reflected the kids being killed. And they demanded cycle lanes and low traffic neighbourhoods and they demanded space back from the motor car. The politicians listened, and now Holland is dominated in family districts. Residential districts are low traffic neighborhoods, which means cars drive into them, they drive out to them, but they can't drive through them. You can't rat through them. And they've created a network of cycle lanes to school. What has that resulted in? 75% of Dutch kids now cycle to school. 75%. 2% cycle in the United Kingdom. What has happened in terms of health? We have an obesity rate 2.5 times the kids in Holland. And if you start a kid at 5 to 10 years old being obese, they will probably carry that for the rest of their life with all of the horrific health implications that are resulting from it.
Yeah, I mean, it is staggering when you lay it out like that. And I think maybe some people also maybe focus on older people. Well, how's an older person going to get their weekly shopping, or how are they going to pick this up because they can't carry it on the bus? But we now live in a culture of home deliveries. I think every major supermarket delivers. You can even order, I think, within the hour. There's some of these smaller delivery companies, you can almost get a small amount of shopping delivered within an hour to your house. So that's no longer an argument either. And the thing I find was...
There's an interesting point there, sorry for interrupting.
No, carry on.
You mentioned older people. One of the largest cohorts of people who cycle in Holland are the over 60s.
Oh, brilliant, okay.
They can't afford to run a car. But they can cycle, but because they cycle when you're older, it's more difficult to turn your back to see what traffic's coming. So it is really beneficial for older people to have low traffic neighborhoods that don't have rat runs through them and to have cycle lanes. So having the infrastructure in place means they feel safe enough to cycle to the shops, to cycle to the library, to cycle to the doctors. And that has a huge impact for their quality of life. And the other thing that applies to older people that people don't understand, often an older person who is unable to walk can cycle, because cycling takes the pressure. A lot of the older people have, sore knee joints, sore backs, and especially sore hip joints. Cycling takes the pressure of that. Somebody that couldn't walk 100 meters can cycle 5-10 kilometers. It's incredible. And so people forget about this, that actually it is hugely beneficial to older generations if the country allows the infrastructure to be there for them to feel safe.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense, from that point of view. Absolutely, because one thing I also find is whenever you're in London, you're walking and you see people sitting in these, traffic jams of, and it's 5 cars through and they've got to wait and you can see the emissions, belching out the back of the car, but it doesn't look that much fun for the driver or the passengers. And I just wonder, do those people enjoy being in a car? Why are they not thinking, well, I could actually get out this car, not have to worry about parking it, I could get into my place, I could be walking listening to my music, I could have a coffee in my hand. Why are more people not keen to get out of their cars? Is there a reason? Is it laziness?
There's a whole range of cultural issues, from laziness through to, I think there's a huge cultural thing about owning a nice car. So it's what's showing up to the Jones. There's like a status symbol associated with car ownership. But secondly, we shouldn't underestimate the advertising industry. Huge amounts of money. I don't know what it is in the UK, but probably hundreds of millions of pounds spent on advertising. And how often have you seen a car advert in the middle of a city, in the middle of a traffic jam?
Yeah.
Every single advert it's out in a beautiful sunset. There's not a car in sight. You're going down a country road. You're by the beach. The sun's shining. There's a beautiful...
Here's in the wind's in your hair, all that kind of stuff. Yes, yeah.
There's a beautiful woman or a beautiful guy in your arm. And you're so subconsciously, you buy this car and you will have the best sex ever, and you'll never be in a traffic jam, and life is going to be brilliant. You're going to be at one with nature. And then the reality, of course, you're stuck in the traffic jam in the middle of the Strand. And I think subliminally, it presses huge amounts of anger buttons. And so this older 50-year-old bloke who is married to his car because he's identified with it hates people like me, because I'm saying, we need space for kids. We need space for elderly people. We need to clean up our pollution. We need to tackle climate change. And so you should see the abuse I get online. I mean, it just pours out to me from these angry 50-year-old men who I'm upsetting their entire cultural identity. And I think it's not their fault. I think they're part of the culture that's actually that's just what's the word? They're flooded in from the media to actually say car equals masculinity. In fact, for many of them.
I mean, I think you're generous in saying it's not their fault. I mean, I understand, we can all have advertising and stuff, but I think when you start, I mean, it doesn't take a degree in biology to work out emissions, ill health, problems with children, problems for older people, problems for us all. Okay, all these issues, congestion, time wasted. I mean, it doesn't take even wildlife, birds, small animals, etc., etc. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work that out, does it? I mean, if that's more important than sitting in your BMW, I think you've got to maybe reevaluate your priorities in life.
I share all those concerns, but I do think we need to understand that people are placed within the culture that they've grown up in, and if you spend 30, 40 years being told a car is equal to your status, is equal to your sexuality, is equal to your place in society, your identity, when somebody comes along and says, actually, no, it's actually a negative, it's destructive to the planet, it kills kids, it's killing our future, that's hard for us. And we are wired as human beings not to change radically. And especially the older we get, the more we get set in our ways, and we resent people telling us that what we've done for 40, 50 years is actually negative and destructive. And so therefore, I think we have to recognize human psychology in this.
I mean, part of that, I think, also is maybe younger people. I know when you get to 17, 18, you get your driving license, and it's kind of seen as freedom. I can sort of jump in the car and I can drive anywhere. But in London, I mean, you can jump on the tube or the bus and go anywhere. Okay, you're not driving that. You're not in control of that vehicle, but you can go anywhere. Again, is that another thing maybe that younger adolescents see adults and go, well, that's what I want, a piece of that, I want that freedom, I want to, and they maybe mimic, like you say, we have to kind of break the cycle where younger people don't grow up sort of not idolizing, but maybe looking up to that kind of thing, of that freedom and having your own car and steering your own ship, so to speak.
I think that culture is breaking down in London. A lot of younger people from all classes are understanding the implications of car ownership, but they're also understanding the advantages of not having a car, having to park it, to pay for it, to maintain it. What happens if it breaks down? One of the things I find interesting, I quite often have to do interviews at the other side of London. I live in Camberwell, and I have to go do a lot of interviews for GB News, which is in Paddington. Doing that journey by car, oh my God, where did I park it? And I'd have to allow for it. What happens if there's a traffic jam? What happens if I'm stuck in traffic? Whereas actually with my e-bike, I know exactly how long it's going to take me. It's going to take me 35 minutes. So that saves me. Even if I had to go public transport, I'd probably have to add another half an hour, because I wouldn't know exactly whether the public transport is going to be stuck in a traffic jam or not. So the interesting thing about being a cyclist in London is actually improves my health. But actually, I know it often gets me there to my destination faster than using a car. But thirdly, I know the amount of time it's going to take. So for me, it's hugely efficient and saves me a lot of money.
And also, is there I've got some personal experience. I won't go into this, but losing a family member in a car accident, and they weren't driving. What about that issue? I mean, that is something else. So that obviously you can hurt someone on a bike, but not to the same extent as you can with a car or a truck or a bus. Is that not something as well? Just general safety of people. There must be so many fatalities involving cars or injuries that you wouldn't get on bikes or walking or e-bikes and things like that, or scooters.
Absolutely. 13,000 kids get injured or killed on our roads every year. 13,000. And what's extraordinary is, because I've been a campaigner on cycling for quite a while, is the right-wing billionaire media keep framing it as there's a war on the motorist, there's a war on the car. And I had these interviews today on TalkTV and GB News, and I'm going, hang on, in a war, who gets killed? Who's been killed in this war? How many kids have gone and killed a driver? How many cyclists have gone and killed a driver? I don't see any war on motorists. I do see a war on cyclists, pedestrians, and pensioners. And the idea, the low traffic neighborhoods, if you're familiar with them, the studies have shown that crashes can reduce between 50 to 70%. Now, why would the government announce yesterday that they want to review them and look at whether they can actually force councils to reopen these rat runs? Because that's what low traffic neighborhood is. You stop the rat running through it, and cars have to use the main roads, and HGVs have to use main roads. Because what's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is that with TomToms and with sat-navs, quite often they're now taking people down family streets that the traffic would have used the main road. And so it has hugely increased the danger on kids' roads and taken away their freedom and safety. And, so the Prime Minister announces a policy that he's going, because the Daily Mail and the Sun were fulfilling the FFUK Howard Cox campaign to destroy cycle lanes and destroy low traffic neighborhoods. Why would we have a Prime Minister announcing as a policy, I want to triple the crashes in the streets where our kids live? That's monstrous. And the campaign the Sun has launched today is, I can't remember what it's called, Break Britain or something like that. Basically, they're calling for the end of investment in safer roads for kids. They want to increase the Tory candidate for mayor wants to increase the speed limit. At 20 miles per hour, the risk of death is 2.5%. At 30 miles per hour, it's over 22.5%. What that means is, if your child is hit by a car at 20 miles per hour, at 30 miles per hour, supposed to 20, they have a 10 times higher chance of being killed. Why would you stand for election on a platform? I want to make it 10 times more dangerous for your kid to be killed on the road because I want cars to travel at 30 miles per hour instead of 20 in residential urban areas. It's absolutely horrific what the billionaire media are doing to our people.
And most of us, not everyone, but a lot of us have children, so we can all put ourselves in that shoe, no matter what political persuasion you're from or ethnic background, whatever it is. I mean, we've all got children, so that hits home with everyone. Can I ask you about? So, can I ask you 2 points? ULEZ in London right now. Now, outside of London, for example, or bigger cities, do you see it having a role, or is this just, do you think, a policy that's going to be instituted in cities like London that doesn't have a role in other places? Is that what you're saying? Kind of ring fence cities with this policy, and then when you go further out, it's do what you want.
That there are many cities across the UK that have equally polluted city centres that are breaking the WHO regulations for safety. There are a number of councils that are already being introducing ULEZs. I think one of the problems sometimes is the word ULEZ. I prefer to call it clean air zones, because actually once you have something like ULEZ, the media can make it into a monster, make it demonize it, like Brexit became a catchword. Net zero is another one. They use net zero and demonize it. It's actually carbon free. It's actually taking care of carbon pollution. But if you make it net zero, oh my God, it's net zero loss, and it's all a horror thing. And the same with ULEZ. Oh my God, it's this monstrous ULEZ. And the word Z, the Z works on our subconscious. When actually we're saying, clean air for kids, it's selling it on that front. So yes, there are councils outside London because they're under a requirement from the Tory government to put policies in place to clean up air, so they pass the regulatory safety levels for pollution.
And in terms of, are we one step now from maybe, like, is ULEZ, in your view, we do ULEZ, we get that operating well, and then do we go car free? Do we almost kind of, I'm not going to say barricade cities, but do we almost kind of make them only buses, public transport, bikes, and pedestrians? Do you think that's the next stage where we almost take the car out of these cities? Is that something you see a next step to ULEZ, or do you think ULEZ enforced properly is enough?
No, ULEZ is not really about removing cars. ULEZ is just about making sure the cars that are on our roads are clean. They're not absolutely toxic and filling our kids up lungs with toxins and killing them with asthma. tackling the car culture is a separate conversation. And I think there will always be room for, well, we have to have room for delivery vehicles, HGV trucks delivering goods, etc. Work people may need tools and stuff like that and equipment. But what we need to do, and there will always be some people who will need to use cars in certain situations. However, what we need to do is to actually target the people who are the healthy and doing shorter journeys to persuade them to move towards cycling, buses, active travel for many reasons: congestion, pollution, and health, but also quality of life. You know, every car you take off a road, off a residential road, is a space for a green tree. You know, they have done neighborhoods in Holland where in the residential areas the car is a guest. And so, whereas actually in the UK, it's the child is the stranger. The child is the imposition on the landscape. There's no recognition that this is a child's family, community, place to play. I grew up, I'm 64 years old. I grew up in an era where I went out during the weekend or in the evening, I went out, my mother said, you know, be back when it's dark. And we had that freedom. Nowadays, almost no kid has that freedom because the parents are so terrified of car danger. And I just think, what a terrible, terrible thing for us to have done. How dare we take the freedom of childhood away from our kids? How dare we restrict them within, fenced schools, within their homes with their laptops and their mobile phones, and having to socialize under supervision always. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a horrific thing we've taken away from them.
Yeah,
generation.
I mean, one thing I find with the cars is
it's also abuse to allow a child. It's now considered abusive and bad parenting to allow your kids out to play.
No, sure. I mean, one thing I was just going to say that what I find with cars, if you're out with a buggy or you're out with a wheelchair, a lot of car users park on the pavement, and quite a lot on the pavement, which sometimes you end up on the road navigating round a car, and that's okay if if you've got your wits about you, but it could be a dark evening, you could be a small child, there could be ice on the road. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out that there must be accidents. I'm sure there is like that. But a lot of car users just think, well, I'll just park on the pavement, jump out of their car and disappear. And that's, again, we accept that in our society, and you step back and go, why do we allow that to happen?
Agreed. A lot of selfishness. I think there's a strange thing that happens to human beings when you're within a what we call a two-ton metal box. You kind of feel you're within a TV set, and you're separate from the world around you. And there's a real sense that actually the car is your body. It's if you touch a car, you've invaded somebody's personal space. And so there's this strange merging of our body space and human psychology with the car. And I think that has a dehumanizing effect in terms of empathy with other people. If you're walking down or cycling down a road, you would never seek to push people out of the way. Whereas with a car, you feel you've got the right to do it. And so they scream at people if there's somebody walking across the road or a cyclist is in their way. And just the road rage it's extraordinary. And I just don't think it's bad people. I think it's just what the culture and the actual physical presence of the car does. And I think there's also a lot of fear from driving. You're afraid of hurting a cyclist. You're afraid of, and so you start screaming, and your stress levels. And oh my God, I've never owned a car because I just don't want to go through all of that.
Oh, good on you. You've been generous for your time. So I find a couple of points. One thing I wanted to say was maybe people, if we say in London, people that may be fairly well off, if they've got a nice car, BMW, Mercedes, whatever it is, who cares? They can afford the £12.50 if they have to pay it, or they're not bothered, they'll just keep buying a new car. It doesn't matter to them. Every year they'll buy a new car, so they've got the cleanest car, but they'll keep on driving. How do we maybe make a dent in there? Do you think it's just psyche, it's ego, it's trying to educate them? Is that how we make a dent in those people changing their behaviour?
Oh God, that's $1 million question. Well, first of all, I think you need to put the infrastructure in to help people change from cars to active travel walking. Because most people, the surveys have been done that over 60 to 70% of drivers would support having cycle lanes, and 67% of London want to cycle, but a lot of them are terrified of falling under a bus or under a HGV truck, and that stops them from cycling. And so therefore, one of the things that some councils have done is they've provided training for people that actually they do a one-to-one training, and they will show somebody a route to get from their home to maybe to their work or their school that actually doesn't involve cycling down main roads with buses and trucks. And that actually helps people get over the fear. Fear is a 4-letter word when it comes to switching modes. People are frightened of cycling. And that's what they've cracked in Holland by actually having the infrastructure in place, the low traffic neighbours and the protected cycle lanes, not the painted cycle lanes, that actually helps people make that move. And then obviously you would, no matter what type of charging system you put in, such as road charging, the rich will always be able to afford that. So actually making it easier for people to cycle, making it less easy for you to drive is the way forward.
I mean, you say fear, but what's the fear in coming out of your house, walking down at the bus stop, standing at the bus stop, getting on the bus, getting off the bus, and walking to your final destination? I mean, London you can do that quite easily. What's the fear there?
I think there's probably some class thing as well. There's some rich people don't feel they want to mix with the middle classes or the working classes, and there's all sorts of reasons why people use cars. Some people are antisocial; they don't like being on in places with other people, etc., etc. But if we're nearly finishing, I suppose the one thing I'd like to leave before we leave is you talked about what happened with Uxbridge. One of the interesting things about Uxbridge is that nobody pointed out the majority of voters voted for pro-ULEZ parties.
Yeah. If they'd been together, they would have. If they'd all coalesced around one candidate, they would have won.
The Lib Dem, Green, and Labour vote was more than the Reform, the right wing, extreme right, and the Tory party combined vote. It was around. Don't quote me exactly on figures, but it's around. I think it's around 48% to 46%. So a narrow victory. And the other thing we have to remember is there was a 7% swing from the Tories to Labour in Uxbridge, despite ULEZ. And yet it was extraordinary. So the Tories lost a massive by-election to the Labour in the north, a massive by-election to Lib Dems in the south, and a 7% swing in Uxbridge to a tiny majority. And what has happened? The media say, oh, wow, the Tories are doing brilliantly. And so what they've decided, and this is a real danger to not only us, but humanity, what they have decided that having propagandized that ULEZ was a monstrous policy and tried to make it a referendum in Uxbridge, and they think they've won it because of that, they have now decided to make climate change and attacking the protecting kids, schools and air as a central theme for the next general election, because they think that if they persuade, and Sunak seems to have adopted it, Sunak seems to have said, if I go totally anti-climate action and anti-protecting safer roads with cycling and low-traffic neighbourhoods and cleaner air, I could win the next general election. So what's disastrous happened is up to now, we've had a cross-party consensus that encouraging people to walk and cycle and use public transport is good for the economy, health and climate. We've had a cross-party consensus with varying views on how far and how fast on tackling climate. The right-wing billionaire media have done, in my view, in the last 2 months, what they did in Australia and in America 10, 15 years ago. They've made climate a left-right issue. And so that's a disaster, because it looks like the Tory party will move into the UKIP territory of opposing all climate action. And that's a disaster for the country, because we need cross-party. It has to be left-right coalition. We have to be all in this together if we're going to save humanity from destruction. And that's what I think is a disaster has come out of Uxbridge, is the right-wing media think, yes, we can actually hammer the opposition parties on support for climate action and make it a divisive issue, whereas up to now it is a uniting issue. And that's to my huge concern of what's come out of Uxbridge.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it affects us all. I mean, we're all out there breathing the same air. I mean, we've all got young children or family members that are growing up. We don't want them in this mess, and we want cleaner places. And I mean, Richie Sunak, I mean, I mean, he's a guy who takes helicopters, 8 minutes down the road and stuff like that, when he could get on a train for half an hour. And I mean, it's just, I just don't understand the people that are buying into this. And I don't mean, might you say maybe they're just being hoodwinked, but even if I'm right in saying the Uxbridge by-election, the MPs don't have the power to muck about with ULEZ. It's the Mayor of London, who's a separate election and separate body. So you're voting for someone to fight ULEZ who actually can't do anything about ULEZ because the Mayor of London decides ULEZ. So I mean, what was the point? I mean, it seems like almost when in Britain we've got this kind of I don't want to say fake news. I think it's a bit of a lazy term, but people are almost being deceived and believing it, or like you say, following these marketing or media campaigns and jumping on a bandwagon that is really going nowhere. Yeah,
propaganda machine. When I was involved in the Liberal Democrats and I was deputy chair of the party, and I became aware of the power of the billionaire media, the Tory part, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, when he was giving evidence to the Select Committee in Parliament about COVID, he said Boris Johnson used to wake up every morning. The first thing he'd do is look at the editorials in the Telegraph, the Sun, and the Mail, and he would decide his agenda from that. Now that tells you where the power in Britain lies. When I was deputy chair of the Liberal Democrats, one of the things I wanted the party to campaign on was on European issues in European elections. I used to get very frustrated. In European elections, the party used to campaign on national issues rather than European issues. And so when I got elected to the board of the party, one of the first things I did when the next European election came up, I said, can we please campaign on European issues in European elections? Very radical concept. And the chair of campaigns told the board of the party, no, we can't do that. And I said, why? He said, because if we campaign on European issues in European elections, Murdoch will hammer us. And I said, oh my God. This is the mid-90s, 95, 96. I said, if the most pro-European party cannot campaign on European issues in European elections, if ever there's a referendum on Europe, we've lost already. And the point I'm telling you of that story is that because most people in Britain don't understand how powerful the 5 UKIP media billionaires are over policy and what happens in our world. And the reason we don't know that, because they control the media ecosystem. You and I don't know how much of our thinking has been impacted on the Overton window that they allow debate to take place on. Mm-hmm. And so it's very hard to say to people. In my view, we've all been brainwashed by these 5 people because they control a huge amount of the press, TV, radio, even the book publishers, and even radio and film studios. So if you think about if a very small class of people, the billionaire class, controls what we read, listen to, and read and watch, where do we know how you and I think has been shaped by how they control us? And so therefore having this conversation about how powerful these people are is very difficult, because I'm speaking about an issue that people won't have heard about. And so they say, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then they'll walk out and they'll go back into the ecosystem and do nothing about it, because nobody's telling them, look what's happening. We would not have had Brexit if 5 billionaires didn't own our press.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one thing I think is very interesting is that, had the press, and obviously newspapers used to sell, so many millions of copies, but there's obviously been a massive reduction and younger people don't buy newspapers. But now we have the explosion of social media, but also online. And I was going to ask you about that. GB News, you've been on there quite a few times, TalkTV. So these are obviously the same type of outlets, but in a different format that younger people and other people are connecting with, because they're no longer buying newspapers. Now, you go on GB News, I've seen you on quite a few times. I don't know how many times you've been on, but you've on several times or many times, like this, whatever. Why? I've got to ask you, because is it not like banging your head off a brick wall? Because I feel like, you're you're always talking to people who automatically think, this guy's talking garbage. I'm talking to people interviewing you. I think that's what they give off that image anyway. I don't know their thoughts, but why do you do that? I mean, because to me it seems like it must be so frustrating, and almost people are not giving you a fair hearing. So why engage?
No, very good question. It is emotionally battering. to do it. But I took a decision 3 or 4 years ago that as a campaigner, I look at a lot of people who care about the environment and care about climate are from the centre or centre-left of politics. And so I go to their conference and I look at who they're targeting, and they're nearly all targeting the centre and centre-left. But nearly 50% of Britons vote for right or far-right parties. And if we're going to win on protecting the future for our kids, if we're going to protect what remains and restore biodiversity, if we're going to survive as civilization, it has to include people from the right. And so that's why I go on those programs, because I think we have a duty to go out and engage in areas that are outside our comfort zone. And that actually, I don't know whether it does achieve anything, but at least I'm planting the flag there, and that people hear a different viewpoint. And that's why I do it. And it is incredibly emotionally damaging.
What's it like before the GB News? Do they give you any kind of prep? I mean, because it's quite a controversial news station within Britain. What's it like before you go on? Is there sort of any ground rules, or is it quite fair? Say what you want, or do you feel as though you're sort of maybe limited before you go on, or is it quite a fair hearing? What's your opinion on it going on there? Because it's quite controversial in terms of Britain. A lot of people have got, it's quite a polarising channel.
Oh, it's Fox News. It's basically a Sun. It's a TV version of the Sun. It's about division. It's about far right. It's not a Tory. These are not Tory TV stations. GB News and TalkTV are not. They're billionaire right wing, almost fascist agenda. If you look at the comments I get, it's from the far right. I get absolutely ton of abuse on social media anytime I appear in it, and it's far right. And what's very worrying to me is that I've watched what's happened in America over the last 20, 30 years with this type of TV station run by Murdoch, and Sinclair is another one in America. The brutalization and the shifting of the political Overton window not to the far right has been horrendous. The Republican Party isn't a mainstream centre-right party any longer. It's rabid UKIP. It's absolutely fascist what they are doing now. And I've seen that's been moved by these right-wing billionaire TV stations, coarsening, devising, sowing hatred. It's staggering what it's doing over there. And what I'm now terrified is I see it starting here. They have successfully got a toehold, and I can see that they are amplifying. If you look at who their programs are presenters, the head of 2 or 3 of the far right political parties have their own programs.
Yeah,
Richard Tice is the head of Reform. What's his name? Lawrence Fox is the head of Reclaim.
Nigel Farage is also a regular presenter on there.
Yeah.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, yeah,
from the Extreme, and Julie Hartley-Burke. There's nobody this isn't a Tory party system. It's far right UKIP, and the corrosive nature that will have on our future politics is terrifying. They want to destroy gay rights. They want to destroy women's rights. They want to destroy workers' rights. They want to destroy environmental rights, and they're actually anti-democratic. It's a terrifying agenda.
Yeah, no, I mean we'll come a bit away from ULEZ, but I mean I think the thing I would like to end on is that ULEZ benefits us all. So anyone that's making it into a right, left, or trying to, I mean, you're only kicking the can down the road, because if it's not going to affect you, it's going to affect your children. It's going to affect your children's children. We've only got to see, God Almighty, the heat waves around the world, and I mean, just climate change is a fact. I mean, if you think it's not, you're again, educate yourself.
In the last 48 hours, I did 2 interviews. One for TalkTV with a guy called Andre Walker. And at the beginning of the interview, he started off being, when's the world going to end? And I said, billions of years' time, knowing he was going to come up with something stupid. He said, well, Al Gore said it's going to end in 10 years ago, and hasn't ended, has it? And I said, well, it's not good. I don't think it's right to treat such a serious issue as a sense of humor, as a joke. I said, we've just experienced the hottest day in 125,000 years, according to the scientists. And he jumped in And he just started screaming at me, "You're a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar." And he ended up throwing me off the program. So that was one interview. And then the second interview I did today was with, again, with TalkTV, with Ian Collins. And he was talking about the New Sun campaign to get rid of action on climate change and to get rid of Safer Neighborhoods for Kids, which is a new campaign they launched today on the front page. And he was very pro it. And I said, look, we've just had the hottest day in 125,000 years. And his reply was, "Oh, so it isn't the hottest day ever."
Yeah, no, I know. Did they drop the act off camera? I mean, I don't know if you want to maybe don't want to talk about that, but is it an act, or do you think these people actually believe this stuff?
I think some of it is, for some of them it's an act, some of them do believe it. I think some of them are emotionally damaged. I've come to the conclusion that a lot of them, so I don't know that I should be saying this on air, but it seems to me Murdoch's business model is to find people from minority groups who are damaged or traumatized. So gay people, black people, women who feel they've got chips on their shoulders, are being traumatized, and they're acting out their traumas, and they act it out in a way that's angry and divisive and attacks people by demonizing and dehumanizing them. And these are damaged people, and they should be having therapy, not having national platforms. And some of them are really, really abusive. And it's really, people say, well, they're horrible people. I say, they're traumatized people. They're in pain, and they're acting out their anger as a national TV presenter. And I think it's part of the business model.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all right to have a difference of opinion, but demonizing things, and I think also when you look at scientific fact, I mean, you and I you're probably going to get abuse for this interview, but in terms of climate change, it's a fact. There's no point sitting there and saying emissions are not a problem and ULEZ is not helping, because it does. Okay, you can have your opinion on it and talk about it, but black is not white or white is not black. These are facts.
But let's finish on a positive. Despite all the propaganda, despite all the attacks, the majority of people in Britain, large majority of people care about climate, 82%. A large majority favour low traffic neighbourhoods, no matter what the Prime Minister said. Polling shows it. And a majority of people in London support ULEZ. They support cleaner air. So if we can hang on to that and defend it from the attacks from the billionaire media, we can win all these three. We can have cleaner air, we can have safer roads, and we can tackle climate. The majority are with us. The question is, can we actually get the government to reflect the people rather than the billionaires? That's the challenge I'm issuing to your viewers.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, and just big respect for what you do. As you say, battering your head off that wall, it can't be easy, but if we didn't have people like you, the world would be a lesser place, in my opinion. So respect to you, and thank you so much for speaking to me.